So I'm really late to the party on this one, but some commenters and Patreon patrons have asked me that, they're still interested in hearing my thoughts on the Assassin's Creed film. So what I'm going to try to do is apply my thoughts on the movie to more general, more useful commentary on video game to movie adaptations in general, because I think at this point that's where the discussion really is, and I think that's what people are really interested in as well. And so briefly, my thoughts on Assassin's Creed, based on the Rotten Tomato stuff, I tended to agree with the moviegoers more than the critics. I think it is a far better movie than the reviews made it sound. Now, that being said, there are some pretty major faults with it, and avoiding spoilers, it all revolves around, to me, the psyching out effect people get when it comes to adapting video games to movies. So all the stuff you see in the trailers, and I can talk about this because it's in the trailers. I mean, you can't say trailer content is spoilers. All that stuff about him being executed and nobody knowing he's alive, it wasn't necessary, and it took up screen time that could have been better spent on a few more past action sequences. I think that the movie would have been much better reviewed if there were just one or two more animus sequences back in Spain, because those scenes are amazing. Some people are going to have issues with it because they're speaking Spanish. They are not speaking English. And you know how a lot of people feel about subtitles. I kind of liked it because a big pet peeve of mine in movies is, oh, they're going back to the Spanish Inquisition, but here they are speaking with English accents. It's like 75% really good film, 25% what happened. And that 25% what happened really cheapens the rest of the experience. There is a good movie in there, but I went with a friend of mine who had played the games, and my husband who hasn't. He's vaguely aware of them, but it's not one of the ones he watches. So he didn't know about all the lore in it other than what I told him. And even having some idea, we spent, I think, 25 minutes after the movie trying to explain the Apple of Eden and what it was and what it does, and sort of the various lores that certain things they over-explained, and certain things it needed more explanation, and they seemed so afraid of the whole first civilization element of Assassin's Creed lore that it actually left a huge chunk of context out of the story. And I will admit that the way they chose to use the apples of Eden in the movie was ridiculous. It was like, oh, that just hurts. That's just bad. It felt so dumbed down. And so people get this, oh, video game movies are stupid. But it was the movie part that made it stupid, which means it has nothing to do with a video game movie. It has to do with this arrogance that Hollywood has when it comes to adapting video games to film. And there was another part where, to me, the leap of faith speaks for itself. The breathtaking moments in the games. Why they felt the need to have Marion Cotillard call it a leap of faith. Like, there's a moment where they do it and it's awesome. It's like, whew, and then she goes, a leap of faith. A guy just jumped off a building and walked away after falling like 125 feet. That does not require explanation. So they gloss over the explanation for why this metal ball that's called an apple, invoking, a Judeo-Christian myth, that didn't require explanation in their minds, but they had to name the dude jumping off a church spire. they did another similarly stupid thing with the Hidden Blades, where instead of the Animus being this, just machine where you lie there, because in the game it's all about, oh, you're sitting there playing a game, so they want Desmond to be still. But in this, he's moving around and it's his big arm and everything like that. And so they actually put the Hidden Blades on him, but they're Leonardo da Vinci Hidden Blades. So how can he operate them while still having his ring fingers? They over-explain and under-explain at the same time. Games don't make these mistakes as often because any mechanic has to make sense to the player. A player has to be able to use it. But in movies, they went for this massive visual with the big jumping around giant arm Animus. They don't stop to go, how does this work? Because it's this conceit in Hollywood, oh, it's just a stupid video game thing. This is writers and producers and probably even the director getting psyched out about this idea that there has never been a good video game movie, that video game movies are somehow inherently crappy. And that is a fallacy. First of all, 80% of everything is crap, and I'm being generous there, saying there's 20% that's good. But a lot of bad movies are made. I mean, what's that one that's out right now? Everybody's piling on Collateral Beauty. I mean, that had nothing to do with the video game. Classic films now, like things we consider, mother's milk, were seen as travesties in their day. The first one that comes to mind is the Walt Disney Alice in Wonderland movie. That was considered just heresy and a dumbing down of the subject material. Gone with the Wind got criticism for dumbing down parts of the book. I know people who are still angry they didn't put Tom Bombadil in the Lord of the Rings movie. I stand by that choice. And so there are always going to be the people that complain that the adaptations they made for the film were not the ones they wanted. But a film has to be a film. It has to exist on its own. And I really feel like people are going to see a video game movie for action. It is an action film. Video games are predominantly action-based entertainment. And yes, I know there are some of those walking novels and things like that. Life is Strange, Gone Home, all that stuff. Fine. Well, could you imagine Gone Home, the movie? Oh, Lord. But just staring at walls for 2 hours. But people went in there with an expectation that it would be people jumping off of buildings and stabbing stuff. And so when people were jumping off of buildings and stabbing stuff, people were happy. When it was people whispering at each other, people were not happy. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking, how could they have got that present day past simpler? And the thing I came to, there was no reason to have him be a convict. They were making a philosophical statement on the inability to stamp out violence in people, kind of Clockwork Orange style, that the liberal intelligentsia that reviews these films is never going to accept. And I think people had a hostile reaction to that. I thought it was gutsy to actually make that statement. They made some very bold statements in the film that I quite liked, and the female characters were amazing. They don't get a ton of screen time because nobody but Michael Fassbender gets a ton of screen time in this movie. But saying a strong character, there's not a lot of complexity to them on paper in terms of descriptions, but the women in the film are, and this is one of the themes, they're willing to make sacrifices that the men aren't. And I'm really surprised that in this rush to dump on the movie, people didn't point out that, yeah, despite its flaws, it did some very interesting things in that regard. My husband, who again just went to see the movie, hadn't played the games, wanted more of those, in the past, in the Spanish Inquisition, periods, because like scenes, in part because the female assassin was really cool and he cared more about that relationship that we'd see only in fleeting moments than anything that was going on in the present. And in terms of what game is it most like, my friend and I agreed that it was mostly Brotherhood. It was definitely in that kind of Assassin's Creed 2 Ezio trilogy wheelhouse, but there were elements of Unity, and then there was a side of Black Flag as well. And that I think they probably tried to do too much in one film. And this is a challenge in video game to film adaptations. Where do you pick up the story? And I thought what they did right was that they weren't having somebody play Ezio Auditore. It's a different assassin. It's a different animus. It's a different wing of Abstergo Industries. And I really enjoyed that element, seeing another part of the vast, corporate network that the modern day Templars have, and how they're doing it differently. And they actually showed that there's, internal struggles within the Templar organization, that they don't have infinite amounts of money, that they do have superiors that they report to, and all that good stuff. I thought that was interesting. The whole movie should have basically been a tutorial level. And I think this is what people have to think, because what happens in superhero movies, right? You get the origin story and you introduce the audience gradually to the superpowers. It's like a, your superhero testicles dropping that first movie. And people like it. People like that induction process, right? I mean, how Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man, how Doctor Strange becomes Doctor Strange, And that wasn't there because they got kind of hung up of, it's in your blood, but there was no, here's an assassin becoming an assassin. And they focus so much on trying to make it order versus freedom and not good versus evil, that people didn't understand it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with giving people in that first movie, no, it's a story of good versus evil. People understand that. And I get in the games, and I like in the games, that it is not that simple. But the reason I like it is because we spent, 4 or 5 games believing the Templars were just bastard assholes. And yes, it is a dumbing down, but it's the right kind of dumbing down. And the issue with video games is the same issue that really long books get into when they're adapted to film, which is you cannot possibly fit it all in, so you have to figure out what to cut. That you have the people that know this material inside out and backwards, and then you have the people that know absolutely nothing about it, and you have to please both. And this was the challenge of the Resident Evil films, and that's the first Resident Evil film is the closest thing I can compare the Assassin's Creed film to. So, maybe this will become a kind of lower budget franchise. Although I doubt Michael Fassbender will want to do that. Maybe it'll be a different person. I think there's enough good in the Assassin's Creed film that I'd like to see them attempt another one. I just think they probably need a group of people who can help them develop a script with a love for the material, as opposed to it seeming like they have an allergy to their own source material. I got the sense that at times even the film thought the source material was stupid. And so they backed away from it in places where it should have just been whole hog. This is, ancient alien technology to really dumb it down. Just go for it. There were these people and they gave us all these things and everything goes crazy. There's these weapons of time, space, and death. But it's also important to not make your MacGuffin too powerful. If you can't see it on screen, don't use it. Something that, like the Apple of Eden, when Desmond Miles is escaping the Abstergo compound in the games, it takes over the minds of the people he can see. That is an effect that feels powerful because you can see it happening. Something that has a global effect, or something that has influence beyond the human eye line loses some of its power because of show don't tell. But it really seemed like if they had just told their story, if they had not worried about the video game to movie bias, because you're not going to appease those critics anyway, they could have made a fun movie that would be review proof and that action fans would want to see. Now, I understand that wasn't quite the movie they want to make, and that is their right to make the movie they wanted to make. And I think that I would recommend it as sort of an on-demand watch at home. It's too bad because those action sequences are phenomenal, but you can watch it at home and still get the sense. I'm afraid to recommend it to people because it does get quite slow, and the biggest issue is sometimes it's hard to understand what Marion Cotillard is saying, because she's got this sort of, she's playing Jeremy Irons' kid, so she's trying to be French and British at the same time, and it really makes it hard to understand her at times. Also because there's a lot of talking in whispers, so even Michael Fassbender garbles some of his lines from time to time. But these adaptations have got to just go, yeah, we're a video game movie and we are making this movie for video game fans. And if movie people want to come in and see it because they like, superhero movies, that's what video games are. They're really long superhero movies. That's what we're making. None of this, oh no, you don't have to be a fan of the game to enjoy it. Why not? Do you think people go to see a Superman movie because if they don't like Superman? Do you think people go to a Batman movie if they can't stand Batman? No, these properties have cachet because there is an existing fan base. And, there's this belief that more people have to see a film than play a game. But those numbers are misleading now. Millions of people are aware of these properties, and there's such a stink on video game movies that those are the only people seeing these films anyway. Let's face it, there's such a bias against them. So you have to make movies that are a good time, and the only way to do it, that's what the Lord of the Rings films did so well. They were so earnest about what they were doing. It wasn't, we're going to say smog because it's easier for people. No, it's smaug because this is the correct way to say it. And all the pronunciations and all the Hobbit eye buffing and, Aragorn looking vaguely smelly and vaguely dreamy at this. They just went for it, right? It was so earnest and so, this is what it is. And I think that's why people really fell in love with it. You look at the Harry Potter films, and those are so earnest. It's, rata actors waving wands and saying nonsense words at each other, but they believed it, so the audience did. And Assassin's Creed, at the end of the day, felt like a movie that didn't believe in itself. It was constantly apologizing for itself instead of just telling its story. And I think if they had just gone in both burners of here's an everyman guy who just gets kidnapped by this organization, one day all of a sudden you're special. There was no you're a wizard Harry moment. And that's what you need. It's like that call to adventure thing. You need these in these adapted properties because that's what's going to make people who haven't played the games go in and want to immerse themselves in these games. Why do I want to be an assassin? That's what the movie should have said. Good science fiction has all these doodads and thingamajigs going on, but in the middle it's a very simple human motivation story. And you can stop listening now, guys, if you don't want to hear my typical stump speech. But here's my typical stump speech. Gamers and the gaming industry and the people who should be advocates for gaming have to stop apologizing for gaming and start cheerleading it. No one's going to think our stuff is amazing unless we think our stuff is amazing. No one is going to want to flock to our banner unless we're saying we're the coolest house at Hogwarts. Could you imagine if Slytherin was going around going, yeah, we know we're bad. Yeah, we know we're manipulative. Like, I don't know why anyone. I hate myself, right? We can always do better. No one wants to join Slytherin House to hear, oh, we can always do better, right? That's what Hufflepuff's for. And some people want to be Hufflepuffs, but let's face it, when you get a little kid, who do you want to be? They all say Gryffindor. Why? Because Gryffindor's Harry Potter's house, and they make Gryffindor out to be awesome. We have to make video games out to be Gryffindor. It's got to be awesome. There's all these cool things. We have this cool common room, and we do these spells, and like that's the kind of stuff. It has to be unabashedly. We are the greatest form of entertainment in the world. And we're making these movies to expose you to these concepts, but really, like, if you want the real experience, play the game. The same way, it's like if you really want to understand the story, read the book. Like, that's what fans of the book do. They're like, no, the book was so much better, right? Even though the movie's great. And so people are like, okay, I'll read the book. And a lot of them go, this is too complex for me, because movies are their speed. They just want a 2-hour experience, and that's fine. But, you know, if you liked being an assassin for 2 hours, and oh my God, you can be an assassin for 35 hours, and it's even cooler. And we have to stop apologizing for liking the stories we like, because what this sort of proves is that gamers are prepared to embrace a greater level of complexity in narrative than film goers are. Film goers want it all handed to them. Gamers are willing to work for it, and that is a fundamental difference. Like, I watched the movie going, oh, I see what they did there, and I see how that piece worked, and I see how that scene harkened back to the other scene and made meaning, and like that one line, but you really had to pay attention. You really had to work with it, which is something a gamer is willing to do, but a film goer who just wants to see people jump off buildings and stab shit, they don't want to do that kind of work. And that's okay. But this idea that, oh, there's never been a good video game movie, so what? You know, like, do people go around, oh, most book to movie adaptations are garbage? No, they don't, even though they are.